Okay, so today we'll talk about two architects, but we'll begin with Tōgo Murano, a very interesting Japanese architect, born in 1891 and died in 1984. So he had a long life and a very creative life. Let's read a little bit about him. So he was born today, but in 1891, May 15th, Tōgo Murano was a Japanese architect. Although his formative years were between 1910 and 1930, he remained active in design throughout his life, and at the time of his death was responsible for over 300 completed projects. Not a little thing. Although his work lacked a distinctive singular style, he was recognized as a master of the modern interpretation of the Sukiya style. I will explain later what this means. His work included large public buildings as well as hotels and department stores, and he has been recognized as one of Japan's modern masters. As I told you, I learned about him not too long ago, and you know, he might be, and he might have been one of Japan's modern masters, but he's not so well known outside of Japan, mainly because he built in Japan. The scope of Murano's work throughout his career covered many styles of architecture. He was influenced by Japanese and Western architecture, but did not commit himself to one particular ideology. Although the sheer volume of his work led him to be criticized as simply a commercial architect, he always gave top priority to the requirements of his clients. I don't think he was a commercial architect, but we'll go through his work. He was the author of a few publications in his lifetime. These included Staying Above Style. So isn't it funny that on Wikipedia, you know, it is written his work covered many styles of architecture, when in fact he wrote a book, Staying Above Style, in 1919, and The Economic Environment of Architecture in 1926. In his 1931, Looking While Moving, he railed against Le Corbusier and the modern movement and declared that the skyscrapers of Manhattan were the way forward. Indeed, he might have irritated Le Corbusier. Here was the man, and I even like the way he looks. I mean, he looks like a you know, a serious man capable of introspection. And there are other good pictures of him on the web, but not a great resolution, so I didn't include them. There is another picture of Tōgo Murano. I even like his name, to be honest with you. I think Tōgo Murano is a well-sounding name. Again, Tōgo Murano, he lived, I think he died at 93, so a long and fruitful life. Now we begin with the Yatsugatake Art Museum. Unfortunately, again, this is not my best presentation, but I hope to incite you to be able to transmit to you some of the emotion I had when I discovered his work. It's not a chronological presentation. I couldn't find a list of his works. Maybe it exists in Japanese, but in English I couldn't find it. So I had to, you know, create a collage of images from various works, but I don't know when this was built and where exactly. But, you know, if you look at this picture, you already are on an unstable ground, because you look at the, you know, the walls, and then you look at the ceiling, and what is going on here, you know? I mean, that kind of ceiling is not typical of modern architecture. Maybe later, but this was built, it's very possible, was built before the Second World War. So almost 100 years ago. Strangely, this kind of architecture is, you know, promoted now at a different scale, you know, by such offices like Zaha Hadid Architects. because parametric design allows for this kind of architecture. But when he did it, there was no parametry, there were even computers, and the dogmas of modernistic architecture were very, very strong. By the way, I just recall that I read that he worked for, I don't know, 10 years for an architecture office, Watanabe, and then he was sent to the United States and Europe to further his knowledge about modern architecture. So he was a well-traveled man, and I understood that even after he opened his office, later on, even when he was older, he would take significant time off to go and see buildings all over the world. So he was a traveled man, and he saw many things, but strangely, perhaps, he built only in Japan. Again, I am not at this point a great expert of his work. I only have maybe some primitive reactions to the images I saw, but what I saw, I like, because it's this tension between, if you make abstraction of the ceiling, you would say this is a very conventional, almost traditional kind of quiet, space. It could have been, built anytime, but the ceiling tells a different story. And I think there is this disjunction, this incongruity in his work, which makes him actually difficult, but also interesting. And the outside, it doesn't leave you indifferent. That style, that Japanese style that I read about, apparently means a classical architecture which allows for small differences or small accidents, things that they seem to irritate the classical system. And in this, the author of the text I read, he found a lot of interest, and the comments, I don't know if I have them here, were also related to the Katsura Palace in Kyoto, that apparently both Frank Lloyd Wright and Walter Gropius admired. That indeed there is some kind of a secret, or I don't know if my wording is well chosen now, secret or a mysterious art of bringing in some imperfection, some accident, something accidental that betrays the system, which might be classical or whatever. The word classical is used in a generic and a little bit questionable way, but it's important, I think, to try to understand the value of difference within a system which allows for it. And this is, I think, difficult to do, to assume a system, an aesthetical system that is not repudiating or is not closing the door to something that might appear oblique or, as I said, having nothing to do with the system. This is not easy to do. His works are indeed above style. And to do some, for example, the works of Tadao Ando are not above style. It's very easy to recognize a building by Tadao Ando. And not just because of his, signature concrete. The Umeda ventilation towers. Now look at this. To me, these are fantastic works. I mean, these are, talking about industrial buildings, these are, the summum of industrial buildings. I mean, they are ventilation towers. But look at what he did with them. I mean, this is a fantastic, it's a surreal architecture done with a function that is, totally, technological. And I find it amazing. Look at it at night. Yeah, of course, we can ask ourselves, why is it that letter T is missing from the word architecture? We have A, R, C, H, and so on. But what if we place a T after the R, architecture? Because, well, in a way, it shouldn't be necessary, because architecture at its best is an art. But for those who do not recall this function of architecture to be art, maybe that T would be necessary. But what I see here is art, clearly, and it's art, but the function again of these towers has nothing to do with art per se. I like them very much, and it shows clearly you can do exceptional things out of the ordinary. You just need that sensitivity, that sensibility to transform, the mud into gold. That's all. Now look at this Catholic church, Takarazuka Catholic Church. I only have 3 images, I think, but they are, look at this. Now, what do you make of this? Even the author of the Misfits Architecture, when he comments on this, he recognizes that at first he was turned off. But then later on, he saw the images. I don't know if he traveled to Japan and he changed his mind. It's certainly a surprising building, especially when you think of it that it's a Catholic church. I really find this architect very risk-taking, and yeah, assuming levels of difficulty that not many would, really. I also like the fact that, again, I like to oppose him to Tadao Ando, but he doesn't like slick surfaces, smooth surfaces. I actually a little bit doubtful about the great virtues of that smooth, signature concrete that Tadao Ando uses. Because concrete is concrete, it's not velvet. Mr. Tadao Ando, concrete is not velvet. It's concrete, it's a conglomerate, as Frank Lloyd Wright called it. It's a cold material. Even if you make it very smooth, in my opinion, it's a failed alchemy. You cannot transform concrete into velvet. You might give the impression for the eye that it might approach a certain quality that might make you think of velvet, but if you touch it, you are immediately brought down to earth, so to speak. Anyway, in opposition, Tōgo Murano, he is using kind of rough surfaces, and I like the rawness of his walls. Also, what I read, and this is very interesting, that in the modern architecture mythology is this desideratum to create a continuum between the inside and the outside. So the outside seems like the inside and the inside seems like the outside. So that to have no separation between the inside and the outside. And the author who wrote about, the writer on Misfits Architecture comments about this. And I think I have, maybe I shouldn't anticipate, but I think it's an important distinction. Apparently in the works of Tōgo Murano, this architect, it makes the inside of the building very different from the outside. And apparently he thought that if you are inside, you should know you are inside and you are not outside. And vice versa. If you want to be outside, well, you go outside. You don't have to be inside and have the feeling that you are outside. Now, if you want to appreciate and to admire the outside, you go outside. And this is interesting. It's a kind of an anti-modern reversal here, you know, and I think we should reflect a little bit about this or on this. I remember when I was a child and I used to go to a village where my grandparents were, like half an hour driving from, maybe not even that, 20 minutes driving from Sibiu to Saliște village. And I spent the vacations there. And I remember, you know, I was looking through the window, sitting in the kitchen. My grandmother was making, you know, something to eat, and I was looking through the window, and the window was very small, you know, a square, an old building with a little window, square. And I remember, you know, the impact the exterior had on me, seen through the window. Although I was definitely inside and enjoying the warmth of the hearth, because I was close to Vatra, you know, and she was cooking and it was warm, and outside when it was snowing, and that time it was snowing during the winter, it was very comforting to be inside and to contemplate the outside from the inside. Anyway, the Miyako Hotel in Kyoto. I mean, even this I find a remarkable work. Look at the roofs. You know, there is a certain level of I almost said anxiety. You know, you can tell this is not a traditional building. It has elements of what might be called tradition, but it has also, you know, in the movement of the roofs, you see gestures of non-conformity. Even you know, the landscaping in the courtyard, it has a certain simplicity and abstractness that differentiates what we look at from, let's say, Katsura or all the traditional Japanese architecture. This man assumed the tradition of Japan, but he introduced some differences, some interventions. So he was looking backwards, but he is also bringing something of the present. For example, I read that he was against mimicking the past and against anticipating the future. He wanted to build for the present, whenever that present was, when he built. I remember when I was talking with Bernard Tschumi some months ago on Zoom, and he told me the same thing. He said, I'm not interested in the future. I'm interested in the present. Now, this could also be a reaction to those demagogical statements, you know, the future, the future. Many people talk about the future while they neglect the present. I think if you are seriously, intensely involved with the present, implicitly, you honor both the past and the future, because on the spiral of time, your work is connected with both. So there is a continuum. But those who so-called, I'm only interested in the future, I'm only interested to build on Mars, I'm only interested in Elon Musk, and so on. Now, I am suspicious of such people. You know, I do think that the main task is to be, you know, as the Latin word adsum, A-D-S-U-M, says adsum, I am present. This word I learned from, I read that Constantin Noica, the Romanian philosopher, published one issue of a newspaper, and he chose this, I would say, this beautiful word, adsum, which means to be present. if we can be present in a painting, in a poem, in a building, in a project for a building, but present in its most intense and comprehensive sense, I think that's all we need, actually. So this work by Tōgo Murano doesn't say no to what preceded us, and I don't think it would say no to what might follow us. So it's both past and present and what might follow us. Let's avoid the word future. Maybe we shouldn't. There is something here that is, modern, but discrete, inserted in an architectural configuration which allows for this difference to manifest itself. And that Japanese word, which I didn't memorize yet, but I will read about it a little later, I guess it refers to exactly this. At the first sight, when you look at this, you would say, yeah, it's Japan, of course, Japanese architecture, but and not only architecture, but here we have also the landscaping, which is equally important, I would say. You can tell that it's not quite, maybe the traditionalists would condemn this work because would say this work is like joking around classical themes. But I don't think Tōgo Murano was a joking architect, and he didn't look like a joking architect, and he is not a joking architect. I like this work very much, again, because it's subtle. It's subtle. The innovations are subtle, and they are inserted with appreciable risk-taking into again, architectural configuration, which would not easily accept such idiosyncratic gestures. I really think this architect, in fact, I'm beginning to, not that, I shouldn't use such affectionate words to fall in love with him, but I am intrigued. I'm curious. I want to learn more about him. Also, I read that this architect was not interested in fame. He was not, I mean, this sounds surreal, no? Do you know architects who are not interested in fame? Not many. But apparently, although he had a lot of success in the sense that he built, we read now 300 buildings. That's not little. That's not a little. Anyway, let's go now to, in my opinion, maybe his most important work, and this was built immediately after the war in Japan, a country which was devastated by the atomic bombs and the loss of the war. Now, of course, they had a role in that war. It's not that they were angels, but this work is very, very interesting. World Peace Memorial Cathedral. And let's look at images first, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. It was built in 1953, so okay, a few years passed since the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Architect Tōgo Murano. So let's read. The roughness of all the materials reflects the designer's desire to create a mood of religious and historical austerity. Murano's articulation of the volumetric and impressively monumental building leaves little doubt about the influence of Auguste Perret's architecture on the design. This is the French architect, Auguste Perret, quite a good architect. And as in the case of Perret, this again shows the influence of Europe, and not only of Europe, on Japanese architecture. These were very cultured men, very cultured architects. And yet they remained, and they even became perhaps more Japanese in contrast, or in some kind of a dialectical relationship with the cultures outside of Japan. This was very typical of Japan, and still is. So as in the case of Perret, such austerity is challenged by a variety of elements that sometimes subtly, sometimes more noticeably enrich the experience. Among them, the various historical references are the most important. The circular dome over the sanctuary and the uniquely roofed small cylindrical chapels on both sides of the main volume recall Byzantine architecture, while the small clover leaf shaped windows seem to be Murano's interpretation of Romanesque wall openings. The simple but lofty 16-meter high interior with its flat, densely ribbed ceiling and massive plastered and arched walls is even more suggestive of Romanesque prototypes. Light filtering through the stained glass windows and occasionally hitting the colorful mosaic image above the altar intensify the solemn mood. Sorry about this small resolution pictures. It's an austere work, but I think the workings of spirit are almost inevitably connected with austerity. If we are to be sincere, you can't just indulge in, on your soft, sofa and claim that you are leading a spiritual life. It's even the yogi, when he wants to achieve enlightenment, does at the end of an arduous journey of almost self-demolition, if I am to use an architectural word here. A very interesting work, because it is, yes, there are historical references, but they punctuate the rather modernistic, austere carcass of the building with just a few elements that, for the connoisseur could mean a lot. Unfortunately, I don't know if I have here, and I regret, because I read some interesting comments about the altar, what is happening here. You see this diagonal here, which is very unconventional. It's actually almost sacrilegious, because it breaks the centrality and the potentially dogmatic or rhetorical centrality of what you are working towards or looking at, and that is God Himself, and that diagonal there is very unconventional, to say the least. This is the plan of the building. Doesn't seem exceptional. I mean, it looks like a simple building, but it's not simple at all, and it has very interesting surprises, if I am to call them so. And I like the roughness, the fact that it is raw. It's not embellished, by plaster. It's not, it's not trying to be clean as Notre Dame de Paris cleaned, the Western facade, that makes me actually turn my back on it. No, this is a building born from suffering. Japan suffered immensely. Yes, it's a memorial of world peace, but and yes, it's a Christian building in the Japanese world. But I find it, again, you cannot have this kind of pictorial representations or stained glass window in a building by Tadao Ando. It's impossible, because a building by Tadao Ando is so puristic that the so-called impurities of something like this, even color, are unimaginable. But an architecture which, in my opinion, is more complex, than the one by Tadao Ando, allows for such infusions or insertions of what the system might apparently might not ask for or easily accommodate. A very interesting architect. Even you know, look what's going on here. You know, I mean, what modern architect to do something like this? And he was a modern architect. Or look at the windows here. You know, if you look at this picture, you could say, you know, this building, I mean, you wouldn't be very sure in what century it was built. Okay, some touches of modernity, so to speak, might be seen here and there, but they are not alarmingly contemporary. I find this fragment of elevation very interesting. You know, I mean, yes, these kind of windows, they don't belong to history, to tradition. They nor this, what's going on here, you know. So I think in this sense, he assumed the degrees of freedom of that Japanese style that was mentioned at the beginning in that text I read, and whose name I still have to learn and memorize. Very interesting architect, really. Because, you know, we have here the, you know, sorry, you have the structure, you know, the concrete structure, but then you have these unusually shaped windows that somehow, you know, they are dissonant. I think this man was able to bring in within the music of his building dissonances. And the idea of a dissonant architecture is I think, to be explored. Maybe there is more dissonance here than in a deconstructivist building, because you have at least two systems that you know, are conflictual, and they coexist. There are elements of an oxymoronic discourse in his architecture. I mean, who would use this window on this kind of tower? You know, it's incongruent, but I think it works in a kind of a difficult way, unexpected way. Well, I guess it was a church on that site that was bombed, not by Putin, by the Americans. Yeah. I wonder if Mr. Putin ever looks at such pictures, you know, and if he does, how he could continue to bomb Ukraine. How? It's beyond me. Great work, in my opinion, by Tōgo Murano. Really, this building could belong, and it could have been built almost just as it is. No, it's beautiful. The more I look at it, I find it beautiful. You know, it's modern, it's old, it's atemporal. This is ahistorical architecture, and yet it has some elements that make me think this could have been built in an Italian town, you know, in a famous Italian medieval town or Renaissance town. It could have been built. It was built in Japan. Very interesting work. I have to learn more about this. You know, what is this? You know, how does he cross with this golden? Now, this is an artwork, but I'm sure he had a word to say about it. You know, because this diagonal maybe says everything about this man, about this architect. You know, if this diagonal was not here, golden as it is, this would have been, you know, moderately interesting and maybe placidly so. But this diagonal shows his non-conventionalism, non-conformism, and it's powerful. It's very powerful. Yes, it's bidimensional. It has nothing to do with space, it's color mainly here, but and form, shape, very interesting. And the exterior, if there were no windows like this could have, could have been a factory, but the windows show something else, that it's a building that is, infused with culture and mysterious things. I don't know what's happening here. I really am very tempted to learn more about this building. Really, this architect needs to be known. He's a hybrid architect. He's a difficult architect. Look at this window, and then at this one. This is different from this. If I show this picture to anyone and ask when do you think this was built, they might even say it was built very recently, or yeah, rather, I actually think the building is very, very contemporary somehow in its aesthetics. This picture is, to me, sheer poetry, architectural poetry. I don't know who took the picture, but I think it's magnificent. The raw matter, the raw materials, the concrete, the bricks, you see how it was built. And then, because of the roundness, you have the shadow and you have the light. And it's just, this is architecture. This could make one fall in love with architecture, with the materiality of architecture, not hidden. This is very important, not hidden. And small so-called imperfections do not damage in any way. In fact, I think they amplify the value, the quality of what we look at. This is architecture. I call it architecture. This picture shows us what architecture is. Sorry for my exaltation. Now, look here. Is here some kind of a little, I don't know what it is, a winged being or something. Now, who do something like this in modern architecture? No one. No one. Someone would claim maybe that Tōgo Murano is some kind of a, I don't know, kitsch architect. No, he's not. He's a subtle and complex man, and his buildings show it. Okay, we move forward. Natani Mura Art Museum. This is another, in my opinion, formidable work. I mean, I have seen, buildings approximately kind of like this. There is a church by, what's his name? I am growing old. Yes, I am growing old. I better not make the effort now to remember those two French architects who, Paul Virilio, and I feel like saying Claudius Petit, but Claudius Petit was the mayor of the little city where there are four buildings by Le Corbusier. No, Paul Virilio, and forgive me, the second name I don't recall, but anyway, forget that. I look at this building and it's architecture is primeval. It's archaic. It's cultural. It's powerful. It's mysterious. And you wouldn't really expect it from, we saw that the other work, those pavilions with those sloping roofs. You wouldn't expect this kind of work from the same architect. These are like, yes, it's an atemporal architecture. And still modern. I continuously come back to the definition of art by Charles Baudelaire. Charles Baudelaire, who was a great modern poet, but who also had incredible insights through his critical thinking about art. And he said that art has two halves. One half speaks about the eternal, the immutable, and the other half speaks about the transitory, the ephemeral. And it has to have both halves. And I think this building does have them. It seems to be kind of like an atemporal structure, you know, yes, permanent, eternal, and so on, like some big rocks or big stones. But if you look more carefully, there is also a certain level of modernity. And the two together create that artwork that Baudelaire was referring to, having two halves. And it's very, very difficult to unite the permanent, the, you know, the eternal with the transitory and the circumstantial. It's very difficult. But in a way, every tree has this duality, and but in that case, the artist was God himself. You know, the tree has the permanence of the trunk and the branches, and then the leaves and the flowers in the spring are the circumstantial, temporary, ephemeral elements that nature grants to us and to the tree. So in the tree, you have both also, the eternal, the immutable, and the transitory and the circumstantial. This building could have been anywhere. You know, the man built it in Japan, but it could have been anywhere, really. It's a remarkable building, I think. There is something else here, and I hope I have a picture of this too. I don't know if he built this as well. I have some pictures from the inside. Really, Japan is a gold mine, you know, to study its ancient or old, its traditional architecture, study landscape architecture, study the philosophy. There is much to learn from Japan. Japan, also aware of what it can learn from itself, was also very open towards the outside. Well, after the second half of the 19th century, because until then, it was rather introverted and close to external influences until the ships from Europe arrived there and so on. Anyway, I love this building. This is a powerful architecture, isn't it? But even here, we see those two halves that Baudelaire talked about, the eternal and the immutable, and the transitory and the ephemeral. But I don't know if he produced these fragile parts of this complex of buildings as well. I don't know. But yes, the interior is smooth because it's the interior. The exterior is rough. But even the interior, I think, doesn't leave you indifferent. There are interesting things here happening. Tōgo Murano. Interesting also, I mean, I don't know, and I don't think I have here the plan of the museum, but to have such narrow spaces, you know, where you see half, it's not like a big room where you know, with one glance, you see everything. You know, you see half of a statue, you know, or a fragment of a statue, you walk, somehow the labyrinth is still insinuated within the space, the interior space of the building, which in itself is not quite a modernistic understanding of what, you know, the appropriate space is in a museum. the otherness of this structure is for all to see. On the other hand, I think there is some kind of a harmony through contrast between this building and this building, and they have nothing in common explicitly, but I think they accept each other, and maybe there is even more than acceptance, maybe. Now, this one is, this also will shock you, as it shocked me. It's, you know, when you read the word headquarters, you expect, of course, an office building. And it is an office building, but with the most unusual facade. Or look at this. If you can, you know, ignore for a short while the bicycles at the bottom, look at above what's going on there. Headquarters? How could this be? I regret I don't have the year when this was built, maybe in the 60s. But, you know, it's... I never saw a headquarters of anything looking like this. So you look at this building and you compare it with the building we just looked at, that museum, and you know, is he the same architect? Well, yes, but I find this also very, very interesting. Look at it. I mean, we can imagine how the building on the left looks like, and maybe even the building on the right, although we don't see much. But this stands out. I was almost shocked when I saw it, because it's probably a rectangular building, you know, and yet the decorativeness, the implicit were explicit in the front elevation, makes it enticing, interesting, curious, even bizarre in a way. Very interesting work. No, this man knew something about architecture that most people don't. Now, I don't know these so-called imperfections were planned like this, or these were the effects of the passage of time. But I think his buildings allow for the elements to interact with them. So, you know, they, in fact, just like some wrinkles on the forehead of someone who is not afraid of his or her truth, are not, you know, something to be ashamed of, but actually add some nobility, the nobility of the passage of time on that face. This facade of the building, I don't know if I can compare the wrinkles on one's face with what I look at or we look at here, but again, the fact that these things are not, I don't even know where they planned, or they were the result of the passage of time, of the facade being beaten by, I don't know, snow and rain or whatever. It still looks good. It may be even better than if it was, you know, completely, you know, so-called perfect. The headquarters of something. Tōgo Murano. I think it's hard not to fall in love with architecture after looking at these works, because architecture is a beautiful thing. It's true. Unfortunately, some people make all the efforts to convince us that there is nothing beautiful about architecture, but they are totally wrong. And contrary to what we are accustomed to think, that, you know, the perfection of Japanese design, you know, the cleanness and so on. No, no, I mean, you look here, you know, it's nothing of that, you know. In fact, this fragment of the elevation of this building shows all the, you know, the imperfections of life, and assumes them and transforms them into something qualitatively significant. I think this is great art, not one that needs, you know, refurbishment every day, every year, and, you know, to hide the imperfections. No, this building grows old, and by growing old, it becomes young, if you allow me to express myself paradoxically. I like it. And I don't usually like headquarters of any kind, but that one I like. Now you look at another interesting work by him, the Japan Lutheran Theological Seminary from 1969. Look at this. In my opinion, is better than the Church of the Year, or the New Millennium of the year 2000 by Richard Meyer in Rome. It is better. It is better, and no one can contest, you know, the modernity and the visual vigor. It's excellent, you know. I mean, it's dynamic, it's controlled, it's balanced, it's vigorous. It's in this case, it's even rather clean, but not in an obnoxious way. I like it. I like it. And it doesn't matter where you look at from, it's still an interesting building. And so very different from the others. Look at this. Made in Japan. Tōgo Murano. Excellent work. Too bad I don't have the plans and the sections, but maybe at a future time I will amplify them, because I'll have another occasion to talk about him on the day when he died. Because he did die, but he did have a long life. He died at 93. I like the surface of his buildings. You see, he's not afraid of dirt. He's not afraid of dirt, and that is, he is not afraid of life. Those who want everything to be clean and so on, those are afraid of life. This man is not afraid, was not afraid of life, and was not afraid of the shadows. As you can see, there are deep shadows there. A very sculptural work, although he worked often with rectangularity, but he achieved still sculpturalness. So we are ending the short and imperfect presentation on Tōgo Murano with a few quotations, a few fragments from what I read in this article about him, Architecture Misfit, number 21, Tōgo Murano. And a very good website, Architecture Misfit. Some of the buildings of Tōgo Murano are incomprehensible and indescribably beautiful at the same time. It makes me, that's the author who wrote the text, it makes me want to believe in architecture as art. My personal cynic tells me that positing the existence of a higher logic is primitive human response to anything resisting easy comprehension. But still, well, I don't think he's English or American. I think the text is translated into English, and sometimes the translation, I think, is a little bit problematic. Some of Tōgo Murano's designs resist not only easy comprehension, but sustained rational analysis as well. In the end, no framework for understanding presents itself other than one person's will for it to be like that. I am used to saying that in a bad way for things I dislike, but I'm not accustomed to saying it for things I'm drawn to. Murano's aesthetic sensibility is connected to his mastery of Japanese architecture's Sukiya style. So this is the name, and I read even on Wikipedia a reference to this, that he's apparently, you know, a connoisseur and a practitioner of this typically Japanese so-called style, although we know he wrote a book about being above style, Sukiya. So this word, perhaps we should retain, Sukiya. Sukiya style, we can think of Sukiya as classical Japanese architecture that's been loosened up to admit idiosyncrasies. Yeah, it's like a system which is generous enough and strong enough to accept even what might be called an idiosyncrasy. You know, this is not a little thing. Auditorium of the Nisai Theater, you will see just the ceiling, but it's formidable. I mean, look at this. You know, it's possible that some of the great masters of the past would have been nowhere here, because look what this man did. You know, it's an auditorium, but what is above there is an imago mundi cosmos, but it's also some kind of it's both the macrocosm and the microcosm, and it's also some kind of a landscape upside down. It's surreal. It's surreal. What we see here on the ceiling, we can see on the floor in a beautiful image from the film Nostalgia, the Stalker by Andrei Tarkovsky. How did he do it? You know, I mean, yes, today we have all kinds of fluidities, but in this case, it's not the sleek, whitish and white fluidity of, you know, Zaha Hadid architects and other architects like her. Here we have tectonics. Here we have heaviness. Here we have color. Here we have roughness and rawness, and somehow he is able to handle all of them together. I think it's a remarkable. I don't know about the rest of the room. I became fascinated with the ceiling of an auditorium. It's both primitive and well, I hesitate to use the word, but I have to use it, looking up towards the future somehow. You know, it's both the primitive future that Su Fujimoto talks about. Look at this. I think it's magnificent, and it's Tōgo Murano again and again. Poetry, because architecture at its best is exactly this, poetry. But done with matter. Murano's refusal to see the inside, it might be that this is the last thing from this presentation. Murano's refusal to see the inside and outside as the same thing is eminently sensible. If you want to be outside, you go outside and sit on a seat and enjoy being outside. And when you are tired of that, you go inside, or if you wish, gaze outside through a window, like I used to do when I was a kid in my grandparents' house. And this is actually the last image of this presentation. Is this, you know, through this you can access, you know, this rather complex. I didn't use all the text. There is a lot of information and many images about misfit number 21. that is Tōgo Murano. I thank you for being here.